Hello everyone, in this video we're going to be taking a look at Ubuntu 21.04, which is codenamed Hirsute Hippo, hirsute being a medical condition for excessively hairy, which explains this hairy hippo wallpaper. Well played, Canonical, well played. So this video is going to be a little bit different to my normal distro reviews, in that we're going to be looking at all the official Canonical supported releases of Ubuntu, which there's quite a few releases. The main differences being the different desktop involved and different software combinations as well, because different desktops have different selections of software. Now this is an interim release of Ubuntu which is supported for the next 9 months. The alternate option for Ubuntu is the long-term support release, which is supported for 5 years. These tend to be more stable. Ubuntu 21.04 comes with the Linux kernel 5.11. This is the same across all the distributions. But what is different is the different combinations of desktops. So the flagship version of Ubuntu uses the GNOME desktop. This is GNOME 3.38 with a mixture of the 3.40 applications as well. There was quite a difference between the 3.38 and 3.40 desktops, so the Canonical developers have erred on the side of caution, so to speak, and kept with the older version for this release. To me, the GNOME desktop itself does seem to have a bit of a steep learning curve, more like a steep learning curve in getting used to a very different layout than you would, say, with the Windows desktop. Although you could always have the start bar on the left-hand side with Windows, but if you did that, then the application launcher would be at the top of the screen, whereas GNOME it is at the bottom, or I should say, the Ubuntu version of GNOME it is at the bottom. But otherwise the interface on the application seems very similar. You've got the close, minimise, maximise buttons on the right hand side. Although the application title bar in the GNOME specific applications is a bit chunky, that is because they tend to put buttons and other menus in there. But then on the non-GNOME applications, such as Firefox here, we have a narrower window bar. That does detract from the theming and consistency to me, but that is something you could really get used to and could well ignore it. So perhaps my complaint there is very meaningless and spiteful. Something else you can do in GNOME is use these activities, that is dragging and dropping an application across to a different virtual desktop. But on the launcher I can click across the different applications and it will take me to the appropriate virtual desktop which the application is running on. Wayland has become the default display manager, which has now replaced the aging Xorg. I say aging, I think Xorg dates back to the 1980s. We do have better improvements now in being able to cope with the higher definition displays, and fractional scaling can help here. There's better Active Directory integration, and this is something that Canonical started moving towards in the previous release of Ubuntu, and that is the 20.10 release. There's different options now on the power modes, and that's very useful if you have a laptop, so you could run it in reduced performance and extend the usage of the laptop. But one last thing I want to say about the GNOME desktop, and that is specific to the file manager. What used to be called Nautilus, it's now just called Files, and that is it's really poor compared to what it used to be. It definitely is lacking features, and I would say that in its current state it is more reminiscent of the Windows Explorer. Next up we have Ubuntu Server, which doesn't even have a desktop, so I could say what's the point in me reviewing this? It has no desktop, how are you going to use it? Well, the idea is you use it on a server, a headless server, and you would be accessing it through SSH or through a web interface. But you can also turn Ubuntu Server into a desktop through use of the app's package manager. So yeah, I could do sudo apt install Ubuntu desktop and I would pretty much have a version of Ubuntu. But in my own household I probably have more devices running in this headless server configuration than I do actual graphical user interface desktops. If you're new to the world of Ubuntu and don't know where to start with all this choice of derivatives, what I recommend is you start with Ubuntu MATE. I believe this is the most welcoming distro for new users. You have a nice welcome screen, you get a nice little introduction to the system, you get a simple software manager, you can do a bit of theming from here. It is a very simplified view of what you can do with the customization of the desktop. But there is even more you can do with the MATE tweak tool. But the real party piece of this distro is the different choices on desktop layout, or they call it panel layout really. So with a simple click of the menu I can completely change the style, and I could go back towards a Windows style here, or we could go for a Mac style with Cupertino. You have the more contemporary style here, and For long-time Linux users, this really shows the distro's origins in that it was a fork of the old GNOME 2 or GNOME Classic. But the desktop has still been developed and has continued to receive many improvements. But for anyone who likes the Unity desktop, there is an alternative here with the Mutiny desktop, and it even comes with a heads-up display. The heads-up display being the ability to search the application menus, which for graphical applications like Inkscape is an absolute blessing, because I could think, where were some of those effects that I wanted on the picture? So yeah, I could think of, I wanted something to do with glass. Was it dark glass, stained glass? Oh look, that's where they are. I can just do a search for them. Otherwise I would have to go through the menu, and I know in this case it'll be under filters somewhere, but what's the next menu? I don't know. Look, it's all too confusing here, so that heads-up display is an absolute blessing it was. I did like that feature when you had applications with these larger menus. But for applications that had a more simple menu, like browsers, then no, that feature wasn't really necessary. But it's good to have options, and that is what Linux is all about, options. The Kylin file manager is a fork of the older version of Nautilus and does retain some of the features. For example, there we've got the split screen browsing, we have tab browsing, we don't have a keyboard shortcut for a launcher to the terminal, but if I do right click, then I have the option of opening terminal there, so yeah. That can be a useful feature if you've navigated quite a way through a folder structure and you don't have to sit there typing out cd/whatever. Although I shouldn't really mention too much about the terminal, because in modern Linux you should be able to do everything through the graphical user interface. You shouldn't really have to do everything through the terminal, and to be fair, yeah, we've been able to do quite a lot through the graphical user interface. But if you want to do everything through the terminal, then hey, I'm not going to stop you. One of the changes for the Ubuntu MATE desktop in this release was the Yarrow theme. The Yarrow theme has been around now for a couple of versions in Ubuntu. It has been ported to the MATE desktop, and it seems to have been done quite well. The Ayatana indicators have been reintroduced. This is the sort of customization on the panels, on the menus, and let's say the option here of removing the logout item from the menu. So yeah, if I go to the power menu, we have logout there, but I think, well, I never want to log out, I just want to turn off my computer all the time. So yeah, just select that option there on the indicator, and logout has been removed. That is interesting to see the reintroduction of this feature, again a feature that was around in the Unity desktop, although it has come at the cost of the Redshift night light or blue light reduction, in that there has been a showstopper bug and they can't make it work with this feature at time of release. But they want to reintroduce it in a later version of Ubuntu MATE.
And now we are going to look at Kubuntu. It has KDE 5.21 desktop and is aggressively developed. So in terms of applications, if I open up Discover, the KDE apps have version 20.12.3, and unlike GNOME, there is actually no split in versions, although there has been the rare case of them doing this. And there are a wide range of KDE specific applications. In fact, there are over 200 of these. This allows for consistent theming and better integration with the desktop, although that isn't to say that non-KDE apps look bad. So if we have a look at LibreOffice, open up LibreOffice Writer, you can see this isn't a KDE specific application, but it does look good and it's integrated well. One of the particular applications is, of course, Dolphin, the file manager. So Dolphin is a very feature-rich file manager, has quite a few different snazzy things. One thing that I did in a recent video, which was on ImageMagick, was I used F4 to open up this terminal here. So you've got that shortcut. F3, which is next to it, allows for a split screen in terms of the different copies. Just remove that. And then what we also have is tabbing. So if I just center click with the mouse wheel on a folder, then that opens up like so. So that's Dolphin, the file manager. One KDE specific application is KDE Connect. So KDE Connect allows you to, funnily enough, connect your computer with a device with your Android phone. So it means that you get integration with texts, calls, you can get alerts from that on your desktop, and also there are media controls too. The system monitor is new in 5.21. Quids has done a separate video on this. And there is plenty of space for customization through the widgets. So I can add the widgets, and as you can see, there is much to do, but at the same time, this desktop is very usable out of the box. What you can also do is you can show alternatives. So I've got the application launcher, which was the default. I can change it to an application dashboard, and that changes straight away.
Next up is Lubuntu, but there's something I have to look at first. That boot screen. Damn, that looks good. Now, Lubuntu uses the LXQt desktop. This is based on the Qt toolkit, which makes it very similar to KDE. It is only Kubuntu and Lubuntu that use the Qt base. All the other distros use the GTK toolkit. Although it doesn't mean too much for the end user, just consider it a different sort of code base. So the KDE applications are perfectly compatible with LXQt. For example, Kcalc is actually a KDE application, but it's sat here in the LXQt desktop. Lubuntu is aimed more for being a lightweight distribution. Traditionally, this is what you would use on your very old systems, although 32-bit support has been dropped for some time now in the base version of Ubuntu, which means your older system support is limited to 64-bit systems only. Only a couple of things open. It's using 370 meg of RAM, which is not a lot at all. File Manager is fairly feature-rich, not quite as feature-rich as Dolphin though. Pressing F4 does open up a terminal window as a separate window, but it's at least going to the folder which I'm currently in. Pressing F3 does the search for files instead of a split-screen interface. But yeah, it does have tab browsing, so not a bad file manager. Not quite on the level of Dolphin, but better than most of them. I haven't mentioned anything about the application searcher, but yeah, that does feature in all of the distros. So you can sort of type in the name of an application or what the application is, and you can find it. But despite it being a lightweight distro, you've got more heavier weight applications like LibreOffice. So not all applications are specific for a lightweight distro, but it's up to you if you want to replace it for something lighter, like AbiWord and GNumeric, or even just use a browser and use a browser-based version of an Office application. Next up we have Xubuntu with the XFCE desktop. Now the XFCE desktop is very slow to progress in terms of development. In fact, this version is at 4.16 and it tends to be roughly about a year between releases of XFCE. On the plus side though, it is a very stable desktop. On the downside, don't expect too many shiny new features in between releases. The legacy GTK2 code has been removed in this version of the XFCE desktop. There has been significant improvement in terms of the theming for snaps. They seem to be a more seamless feature, and that is meant to be the whole thing with snaps. You don't want to be looking at a different mouse cursor or a different menu in between applications. That goes back to my mentioning about consistency and look and theming, which I said was a little bit of an issue in Ubuntu, just with the application title bar sizes. I like consistency, I like theming and the icons to look the same across the desktop. They've even managed to get the correct mouse cursor in the Snap version of VLC, which is quite impressive to see. VLC has been quite lagging in terms of application integration for the Snap version. There's no problems though if you're using the deb package version. I know I'm talking about different application package management here, but Snap is a sandbox package manager and the applications can be updated at any time. Whereas with the deb packages, the applications are more of a snapshot at time of release, with only the likes of browsers and other very critical applications receiving security updates. So yeah, Snap packages you'll receive feature updates. Most other packages you will just receive security updates. There are some customizations that can be done with the XFCE desktop, but it's a little bit more complex compared to the likes of KDE and GNOME. But being complex doesn't necessarily mean it's limited.
And next we're going to have a look at Ubuntu Budgie 21.04. So what is notable about this particular release is it is the first to have Raspberry Pi 4 support. And some of my comments, I should say, will be made in the context of the fact that the last time we looked at Ubuntu Budgie, or I should say, the last time that Quids looked at Ubuntu Budgie on this channel was way back in 2018. So some of the comments are in the context of that, and having a look at his video earlier. But at the same time, I realised that perhaps not too much has changed since the last version overall. So in terms of kind of context, really, the Budgie desktop at the moment is at version 10.5.2, and in 2018 it was 10.4 with some elements of 10.5. So we're not moving forward a great deal in terms of minor version numbers, but at the same time I can see that quite a lot has been done, especially with regards to the look and feel. One thing that I'd like to highlight, particularly in comparison to Kubuntu, which I also looked at, is the inclusion of a Budgie welcome. Now, this is great for new users, so it gives you nice little handy links to introduction features getting started, so you get a kind of overview of all the new stuff that has come in with this version, as well as how you can get involved, the online store, etc., as well as a nice link to the themes and layouts. So you get a great kind of overview of the various things that you can change right when you get started with Ubuntu Budgie. Particularly focusing on this, as we can see here, the general theme that we've got this nice kind of pink fading into blue wallpaper and theming, and the menus, as you can see, are fairly dark. We have the what I like to think of as quite Mac-like dock at the bottom, with the different icons, which are actually just the various shapes that they are for those particular applications. But if we were to go to some of the other options that are available, now looking at the release notes, it seems that we have some changes that have been made. So there has been a refresh to Mojave. So if I were to change to that one, now we've got the icons looking particularly rounded and circular and a little bit more Mac-like, I suppose. Looking into the various different menus, as you can see, this is all as was in the default. Everything is alphabetically ordered in terms of the different applications, and of course you get the search at the top as well. Now, one thing I'd like to pick up on with this was that this is the first time I've used Ubuntu Budgie, and as you can see, the default, this Mojave and also the default, which I will show in a second again, they both have this non-categorized, just alphabetical listing of all of the different applications. Now, one thing that I had some difficulty with was thinking, well, how do I get to the text pad if I want to make some notes? So I had to have a click through to actually think of it. I mean, I could have used the search, but for someone who's just encountering this for the first time, perhaps something that may have been a little bit tricky to work around, because I'm used to working with Kate as someone who uses Kubuntu for my day-to-day work. Now we can have a look at White Sir. Now this is a new makeover for this version of Ubuntu Budgie, and this is, again, they say Mac-like, get another Mac-like one, but the main difference being is that you get these kind of more square icons. If you didn't want to have this, alphabetically ordered list of applications, then you also have different versions that do have the categories as well. So as you can see, it's very much a kind of mix and match with the various bits and pieces of the theming. And one thing that's particularly nice to notice is that when something is installed, and this is the default, I think it's pronounced Puccillo, is that you can actually click the arrow once the makeover has been installed. So you can click the arrow and you can actually apply different bits and pieces of the thing. So rather than having the whole thing, you can actually mix and match on the theme fonts and icons as well. So that is quite a nifty little thing that you can do if you'd like to have that level of kind of control over your look and feel. So this is not quite on the same level as MATE, but still a step up from the kind of standard theme changes that you are normally able to make. So my general thoughts about Ubuntu Budgie is that it has a very nice look and feel, perhaps not getting very far very quickly with the version numbers, but at the same time I can see that a lot has been done. I can see that over time there is a trend towards a cleaner looking desktop interface. In particular, over the versions we've kind of lost some additions at the top, such as to the weather and that kind of thing. But at the same time, I think that this is particularly nice. So yes, that was Ubuntu Budgie.
Ubuntu Studio uses the KDE desktop, which Miss Quids has already discussed with Kubuntu, so there's no point in discussing the desktop itself. But what you do get here is a lot of applications pre-installed. Although the distribution is called Studio, you have to think what kind of studio production does it aim for, but it's actually quite a variety of things. So you've got audio production, graphics design, publishing, photography and video production. And one under the hood feature is that it has the jack audio, which is a low latency audio. So it's not just a case of, oh, they've installed a bunch of applications. No, there's a lot of very specific customizations and very specific under the hood features that are aimed more for low latency audio recording. So that could be a very essential feature for someone who is in the market for studio type software. And finally, we have Ubuntu Kylin, which is aimed more for the Far East, or specifically the Chinese market. It uses the UK UI desktop, or I suppose the Ubuntu Kylin user interface. It is based on MATE. I have to say it is very fancy with that transparency. Although I noticed the applications are listed alphabetically, and this was something that Miss Quids mentioned when she was looking at Ubuntu Budgie. But it turns out there is a very easy way to change this ordering here. So you can order by alphabetically again, or split out by letters, or you can order by category. So you do have options here. The file manager is something that I'm not familiar with, the Peony Qt. It doesn't look too bad, not quite as feature rich as Dolphin. I can't see any way of opening up the terminal there. But it does at least have the nice transparency theming like the rest of the distribution has, so it integrates well. Not sure I like these different size window toolbars, or inconsistently themed toolbars. Come on, sort it out. All I can say at the moment, it does remind me very much of being in Windows, where everything is very inconsistent. I do wonder if the Chinese users like this sort of transparency setting in their operating systems, because this is something that Deepin OS has, and that is another Chinese specific distribution. Although I selected English during the installer, I'm obviously being presented with a lot of non-English language here, so it's something I can't even read. I can take a guess at what it says. I know I've got into the application installer, and that's going to be install, let's say install GIMP. There's obviously disadvantages to be had with this. If you don't speak Chinese or don't read it. But yeah, that installer though, very fancy. It's like they almost don't take it too seriously. It does seem a very fun distribution. Nice artwork, nice look, although inconsistent in a lot of places. But one final thing I have to say, what is it with the mouse cursors? This is like the basic mouse cursor that is the default with no other cursor theme available. In conclusion, there's quite a variety in the officially supported releases of the Ubuntu distributions. I say officially supported, that is officially supported by Canonical. There's a whole load more independent remixes and other distributions based on Ubuntu. Perhaps there is too much choice, but hey, if you want to keep it simple for this video, I would say if you're a new user, go towards Ubuntu MATE. If you're using Ubuntu in the enterprise, well, you probably just want to go with Ubuntu itself or Ubuntu Server. If you like stability and very little change, then you want Xubuntu. Or if you want something that's more aggressively developed and going to have new features upon every release, then you want to look towards Kubuntu and KDE. Well, thanks for watching.
And we'll see you all later.